Hi, and welcome back to the series, What's Really Dividing the Obesity Conversation, Part 3. As a reminder, steel manning is presenting the strongest, most logical version of an argument, and that's what I'm going to try to do in this video. Part 3. Is obesity socially consequential? So this is basically, does obesity have consequences for society, not just for individuals? Some examples of how this plays out in the fat activism world. No one owes you their health. It's not anyone else's business what my body looks like or how I live in it. Fat people are not a burden on society. Public health isn't about controlling individual bodies. You don't get to police someone's body just because you pay taxes. The Steelman version of this argument. Health is not a moral obligation. Body autonomy is a foundational ethical principle. People should not be required to conform to health norms to earn dignity or access to public life. Even if someone's weight does have health implications, that doesn't entitle others to moralize, interfere, or dictate their choices. Public health should support, not control. Framing fat people as a drain on society creates a dehumanizing narrative that has historically led to discrimination. So, this particular belief blends fact with philosophy. While bodily autonomy is crucial, obesity does have measurable societal impacts, from healthcare costs to productivity losses to infrastructure adaptations. Denying these impacts outright can hinder nuanced conversations about how to address them fairly and ethically. It is actually important not to moralize bodies, but also to understand that public health often involves trade-offs between individual freedom and collective cost. And that conversation goes way beyond obesity. You see it in other policies, like just one example is seatbelts. Part of the reason we have seatbelt legislation is because when the driver is not seatbelted, if they get into an accident, it can have consequences far beyond their own personal health and safety. Public health policy shouldn't be about policing individual bodies, but instead about building systems to support health. Rejecting any role for public health policy in addressing obesity may also undercut efforts to improve access to preventative care, nutritional education, or infrastructure that benefits everyone. It's unfortunate that it takes labeling something an epidemic or a crisis to promote policies that would be beneficial to all for a variety of reasons, but acknowledging the reality of the strain of obesity on our current system doesn't have to automatically deny bodily autonomy. So I haven't seen, nor did I find, any measurable scientific studies that spoke to this issue. And that's really because this issue is more philosophical than evidentiary. And I could have probably gone into fat activist resources and pulled out some arguments to present, but in fairness, I just didn't think that they would be fact-based enough to fit with the rest of this series. So we're going to go straight to sources supporting the idea that obesity is socially significant. And the first one of these is annual medical spending attributable to obesity, payer and service specific estimates, which was published in 2009. This one here suggests that the costs of obesity were already $78.5 billion in 1998, and that by 2006 they had risen to $118.5 billion, and that they estimated that by 2008 another $30 billion was estimated to cost on top of that. Direct medical costs of obesity in the United States and the most populous states, published 2021. This says that by 2016, aggregate medical costs due to obesity had risen to $260.6 billion, which means that costs due to obesity have tripled in 20 years. So from 1996 approximately to 2016, costs of obesity tripled in the United States, which is an intense increase. And obesity also affects the community in ways that are not directly related to medical system costs. For example, handling severely obese patients can provide medical risk to EMTs, doctors, nurses, and funeral home professionals who need to lift and move obese individuals. Higher weight individuals increase impact on vehicle suspension systems, flooring, standard fixtures, and handrails, potentially exceeding the load limits in public areas that disabled individuals may need to have access to. Replacement of furniture and various service equipment with larger or sturdier options may result in furniture that is unsafe for smaller individuals or puts them at risk of long-term musculoskeletal injury due to poor ergonomics. From here, we go into the final kind of meta question of this entire debate. Are these beliefs in and of themselves harmful? Examples of this in fat activism. Telling fat people to lose weight is inherently fat phobic. Health concern is just diet culture in disguise. The medicalization of fatness is violence. You can't separate concern about weight from cultural fat phobia. It's all rooted in control and oppression. Even if you think it's about health, what you're really doing is upholding anti-fat systems. The Steelman version of this argument. Medical and social conversations about weight are often dehumanizing. Fat people are often shamed, dismissed, and harmed in medical settings. When people argue that obesity is a medical problem or societal issue, they often ignore or perpetuate harmful messaging that strips fat people of dignity, autonomy, and credibility. Even well-intentioned concern can reinforce stigma, leading to discrimination in healthcare, employment, and social life. These patterns of harm matter and shouldn't be brushed aside. The problem with digging too far into this particular belief or claim is that it is almost entirely philosophical and rhetorical in nature rather than purely fact-based. There's very little to debunk here. It's really a difference of moral framing, lived experience, and cultural critique. I think it's possible to recognize that weight stigma is real without concluding that all discussion of obesity is oppressive. Intentions, tone, context, and consent matter. Framing medical concern as morally suspect by default can silence nuanced conversation and inadvertently uphold the very binary thinking the movement opposes. And silencing all discussion of obesity has become a new form of gatekeeping and has real impacts on individuals' health outcomes. We must find a way to talk about health risks while still affirming people's dignity and agency. As far as the argument itself goes, the kernels of truth underlying the exaggerated rhetoric, I find very little to argue with. Fat people absolutely have been and continue to be shamed, dismissed, and harmed, particularly in medical settings. There is evidence of anti-fat bias in some social interactions and systems, such as the weight-based pay gap. But discussing well-studied, gold standard longitudinal studies and their health findings around weight is something that we must figure out how to do while acknowledging the right of every person to equitable medical care and bodily autonomy. These 4 disagreements about medical relevance, behavioral change, societal impact, and moral framing are the core tensions in the obesity discourse. Understanding them doesn't mean everyone will agree, but it helps us stop talking past each other. There's a strong case for centering behaviors over weight in and of itself in how we talk about health, especially for doctors and content creators who want to avoid shame-based messaging. In fact, evidence indicates that behavior-first care is both more respectful as well as more effective for encouraging health-promoting behaviors. But behavior-first care doesn't mean that we should ignore that weight itself can be meaningful in terms of health outcomes and quality of life. We'll explore those ideas, especially the pros and cons of behavior-first models and what correlation doesn't equal causation actually means in future videos. Until then, I hope this breakdown gives you a clearer map of where the real debate lies and how we might engage more thoughtfully. Thanks for watching.